Baltimore Ravens face off against the Cincinnati Bengals in a divisional Week 5 matchup, and we talk about how the Ravens match up with Cincinnati, key predictions, final storylines, final predictions, and so much more coming up on this game day edition of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here today, making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every day and a part of your day in general. We're free and available for you on all podcasting platforms. That includes in video form on YouTube, where you can like and subscribe to the channel. Also in audio form, where you can follow along and subscribe there as well for 5 days a week plus more of daily Ravens coverage, including episodes like today, game day episodes where we talk about all the big storylines, key predictions, and more on the actual game day. So it's a new thing we've been doing here on Locked On Ravens. Really appreciate everybody for tuning in. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Ravens at 2-2, facing off against the 1-3 Cincinnati Bengals in Week 5. First AFC North matchup of the entire year. And obviously, if you remember, at this point last year, the Ravens are gearing up for their final AFC North road game. So crazy how the schedule year to year can be different. But we're going to be diving into how the Ravens and Bengals match up in this game. First segment, we'll talk about the Ravens offense versus the Bengals defense. Second part of the show, we'll flip that field, talk Bengals offense versus Ravens defense. Then finally, we'll move into keys to victory, players to watch, final predictions, and so much more. Let's just get it started here. The Ravens offense is a powerful bunch right now, especially with their improved offensive line play. It's no secret. You know, we're all sitting here. It's no secret. The Ravens are the top rushing team in the league. They are a team that you should fear on the ground, and there are no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Baltimore on the ground, first in yards per attempt, first in total yards, first in attempts, almost any category you can imagine on the ground, on offense. The Baltimore Ravens are first in it. The Ravens also currently have the leading rusher and the ninth leading rusher in the NFL. Derrick Henry leads the NFL in rushing yards. Lamar Jackson is number 9 in rushing yards. Derrick Henry, incredible. I mean, you can't really say enough about what Derrick Henry's done on the ground for the team this season in 4 games, 80 attempts, 480 yards, and 5 touchdowns. So 20 carries per game for Derrick Henry. That's a solid number. I think that number anywhere from 20 to 22 carries on average. Some carries, or some days it'll be less than that. Some days it'll be more than that. But 20 to 22 carries on average, I think, is that perfect sweet spot for him, especially when you have Justice Hill as a complement, especially when Keaton Mitchell is going to be coming back at some point. John Harbaugh gave an update on him. Nothing too crazy, just that, he'll really be back at some point. But Henry's been incredible. And with the threat of both Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson on that field at the same time, Lamar with his dynamic dual threat ability, Derrick Henry with his prowess as both a rusher and a receiver, it's been pretty impossible to stop. And so if you want any shot of really slowing down this Baltimore offense, you're going to have a good run defense. For the Bengals, that is bad news because they do not have a good run defense. They are technically middle of the pack in both rushing and passing defense, but we'll focus on the rushing for now. 18th in yards per attempt at 4.4, and their defensive line is banged up. Sheldon Rankins, who they signed in the offseason to replace DJ Reader, is not going to play in this one, but they should be getting some guys back. BJ Hill, Trey Hendrickson, it looks like he's going to play in this one. McKinley Jackson, who was a mid-round pick of theirs this past year. They have Chris Jenkins. They signed former Ravens legend, not actually legend, but former Ravens player Lawrence Guy, who was with that team for a couple years. He's in Cincinnati now. But that defensive front has not been very good, and Baltimore's physicality should be able to outmatch Cincinnati's physicality on the ground in this game. I'm very bullish on that for Baltimore's offensive line, for Derrick Henry and the Ravens rushing attack in general, Lamar and all those guys, Justice Hill, etc. I don't think it's going to be as brutal as it was for Buffalo's defense, I think Cincinnati can match up a little bit better than Buffalo's. And I also think that Lou Anarumo is not as stubborn as the Bills defense and kind of how they work through things. Lou Anarumo being the Bengals defense coordinator, by the way. But I don't think that the Bengals will see. And again, the Bills actually had to adjust. Jonas Schaefer, the Baltimore Banner, put out a very good article about the Bills. And we talked all week last week. Joe Marino of Locked On Bills. We talked about the tendencies of Buffalo, and they like to play those nickel packages, dime packages, extra DBs on the field, and they don't like to adjust. 4 or 5 plays into the game, Buffalo was like, okay, we can't do this. We have to adjust, and Baltimore still beat them down on the ground. So even if you want to adjust, even if you want to put out the heavy personnel and you want to stack the box and you want to try to make an impact that way and shut down the run game, Baltimore's going to make you pay. And on the offensive line, we saw vast improvements over the course of these last couple of weeks. It was a struggle those first 2 weeks. They've looked a lot better in the run game, getting off the ball, sealing the edges off if you want to run to the outside, if you want to run zone reads and all that, and you want to run to the outside on those, and getting to the second level, opening up the hole. I mean, and it's everybody. It's not just the offensive line, right? I mean, Mark Andrews, who hasn't had a catch over the last 2 weeks, he's been getting down and dirty. Isaiah Likely's doing his thing in the blocking game as well. On the outside, you see guys like Rashad Bateman blocking the heck out of players on the boundary to get guys touchdowns. Like that is the unselfish play that this Ravens offense has to continue to do against this Cincinnati defense, because they don't have a lot of players on that defense where you look at them and say, oh, this is a top guy. Trey Hendrickson, obviously. Logan Wilson, I know Baltimore fans, not really a great relationship with Logan Wilson after some of the stuff that he has caused over the last couple of seasons, but Logan Wilson is one of the better linebackers in the league. I think Cam Taylor-Britt is a really good young cornerback. But other than that, they don't have a lot of guys. I mean, I don't think Jermaine Pratt is anything special. Daxton Hill, Dax Justice's brother, is, that to me, Geno Stone's been atrocious for the Bengals this season. Cincinnati fans want to send him back to Baltimore. Like, outside of those 3 I mentioned, Trey Hendrickson, Logan Wilson, Cam Taylor-Britt, there's no one else on that defense. No one else on that defense that scares me. Maybe some guy will pop up and have the game of his life against the Ravens today. And hey, you know what? More power to him if that's the case, right? I'm not saying that these are bad football players. I'm just saying there's not a ton of star power on that Cincinnati defense outside of a few players. And I think because of that, especially because of some of the weakness and the injuries the Bengals are going through on the defensive line, I think this is an easy game flow game for this team if they can get out to a 14-3 lead, 10-0 lead. It will be some of the same, not all of the same, but some of the same as we saw in week 4 against Buffalo. And again, I mentioned the pass defense, 18th in net yards per attempt again. So they're pretty consistent in terms of them being kind of a middling defense. But I think the Bengals pass defense is just a tiny bit better than the stats show. And I think the run defense is a little weaker than the stats show. But I don't think it's going to be all the same in that Buffalo game, because I think that the Bengals offense is more potent than the Bills offense, especially with the weapons that Joe Burrow is surrounded with. And obviously that's a big part of this, because in game flow, especially when we're talking about offensive game flow for the Ravens, they've been able to get into a very positive game script because they've been scoring. Defense has been shutting guys down. But if one or the other doesn't happen, the game flow all of a sudden becomes a lot more neutral. And then obviously it's just a different type of game. So coming up with the second part of the show, I'll be talking about the Bengals offense and Joe Burrow versus that Ravens defensive front and defense in general that has been playing pretty good football outside of one quarter these past couple of weeks. So be sure to stay tuned. A lot to get to on Locked On Ravens. First, the show is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks. And I love going on PrizePicks, seeing all they have to offer. There is so much that they have over there. I love just seeing everything that is available because they're always updating what's there. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. PrizePicks also offers weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, PrizePicks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value for your lineups. And PrizePicks is the best way to win real money this football season. Which players go off, which aren't. Make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your sports opinions into real money all season long on PrizePicks. So for the Ravens and Bengals game, if you want to pick more on Derrick Henry rushing yards, more on Jamar Chase receiving yards, PrizePicks is the place to be. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. We're back. Our second segment, Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you on this Sunday game day edition episode. Appreciate everybody for being here today. Making Locked On Ravens your first listen to the day and just a part of your day each and every single day. 5 days a week of daily Ravens content plus more. Of course, our regularly scheduled programming is Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. Eastern time, but we do have bonus episodes sometimes on Saturdays. Of course, game day episodes on Sundays and instant reaction episodes after every single Ravens game, plus even after big news. We have so many things going on Locked On Ravens and really appreciate everybody who's been along for the journey. And for those who are new, appreciate you tuning in and starting that journey with us here on Locked On Ravens. We talked Ravens offense versus Bengals defense in the first part of the show. And one more note on that, actually, as I forgot to kind of dive into the stats for the Ravens and their passing offense. You know, they're ones across the board in every single category on the ground, but through the air, they are fifth in the league in passing right now, 7.4 net yards per attempt. The total yards aren't necessarily there because they're not throwing the ball as much. They're running the ball a lot more. They are currently 23rd in attempts, and that obviously is 17th in total yards. That makes sense. But the reason I judge based off of net yards per attempt is because in those opportunities, Baltimore is getting yards. So I'm going to call them fifth in the league in passing. But in terms of the defensive side of the ball, actually, we'll pull up the graphic of the Ravens defense through the first 4 weeks just so we can get a visualization. And obviously, I'll talk you through it if you're in audio form, what this defense has looked like. The rushing defense has been incredible. I mean, if the word run, Ravens have been dominant. Number 1 in yards per attempt, 3.0. Number 1 in total yards, 231 on the ground. The Bengals have guys like Zach Moss and Chase Brown. Obviously, Joe Mixon is the big name there, but he's now in Houston. So Zach Moss and Chase Brown, I think, fit a little better with what Cincinnati wants to do. I'll dive into that in a second. Passing defense, it's improving. Tied for 20th in yards per attempt at 6.4. They're 29th now in total yards. Hey, that's better than last in the league. They're moving on up. And part of it's game flow. Part of it is they're just playing better football there. Marlon Humphrey's played great. Kyle Hamilton's found it over these last couple of weeks. It's been really good to see the evolution of this Ravens defense. And that's the key word, right? Evolution. Zach Orr was never going to come in here and just be the best defensive coordinator in the league week 1 and on. That was not going to happen. There were always going to be growing pains, always going to be things that he could improve on and get better at. And we've seen that where we've seen better play calls, better situational awareness. And obviously, Zach Orr is not the one, at least not anymore, that goes out there and delivers the hits and is responsible for all of that. But the players have also been playing better, such as Kyle Hamilton, as I mentioned. Roquan Smith, I thought, had a better game in week 4 against Buffalo after he struggled. So it's guys like that who are stepping up their games each and every week. Now, I do expect the Bengals to put up points in this game. I don't necessarily think it's going to be a crazy amount of points, but I still expect the Bengals to go out there and have some level of success. Now, here's the thing. This Ravens defense has been Joe Burrow's kryptonite. It's been the Bengals' kryptonite. Mike McDonald had Joe Burrow in shambles every single time these two teams matched up. And we know the stats behind. Right? Lamar Jackson is 4-1 against Joe Burrow. The Ravens have had the Bengals' number, even if you want to talk about games without Lamar, right? But we're going to talk with Lamar because he's going to play this week. But 4-1, Lamar Jackson versus Joe Burrow. A lot of that obviously has to do with Lamar and obviously Mark Andrews. Those two have dominated Cincinnati over the years. But part of it also is that Joe Burrow has not been able to figure out that Ravens defense. Part of which is because the Ravens run a lot of too high stuff against Cincinnati. And that's something that Joe Burrow's had trouble beating when they play the Ravens. And so I'm not expecting the Ravens to go out of that a ton. Obviously, what I do expect with Arthur Millette not playing in this game is more of what we've seen. Brandon Stevens, Nate Wiggins, Marlon Humphrey all on the field at the same time, at the very least, rotating those three in and getting snaps and opportunities with those three together. That's going to be good. But being able to play too high and using Eddie Jackson in roles, obviously letting Kyle Hamilton roam free around the line of scrimmage and being able to defend guys like a Mike Gesicki, maybe a Zach Moss out of the backfield, that will help. You can even put him in the slot if you want to, but we just see so many different variations of coverages and honestly just play calls, both from Todd Monken and from Zach Orr. This is a very complex team to prepare for just in general, not to mention the Lamar aspect of all of this. So on the defensive side of the ball, the Ravens are going to have to be prepared for Ja'Marr Chase. Now, something that I want to bring up as many times as I can to get us ready here is that Ja'Marr Chase went up against Brandon Stevens both times last season. Remember, Marlon Humphrey did not play in either of those Cincinnati matchups last season. Brandon Stevens came in and clamped down Ja'Marr Chase. Absolutely dominated those matchups, both of the games that Baltimore and Cincinnati played last season. So that gives you a lot of confidence in Brandon Stevens. If you want to put Marlon in the slot and Ja'Marr is moving around, you can do a lot. But I would expect to see all three guys on Ja'Marr. I'd expect to see Marlon, Brandon Stevens, and Nate Wiggins all get some cracks at Ja'Marr Chase. But T. Higgins is back now. This will be his third week back after dealing with a hamstring injury. He's a guy that's still kind of ramping up, and we know how dangerous he can be. We know that T. Higgins has had some Ravens games, not necessarily A.J. Green type games or even Ja'Marr Chase type games, but T has had some big games against this Baltimore team in the past. So that duo of Ja'Marr Chase and T. Higgins, you obviously got to look out for. But then it's guys like Andre Oshabash, who those are players that you have to look out for who weren't necessarily there. I mentioned Mike Gesicki, Eric All, that tight end duo. Cincinnati has been using them a lot this season. I mentioned Zach Moss and Chase Brown. Them out of the backfield is going to be interesting. Cincinnati as a team on the offensive side of the ball obviously struggled the first couple of weeks. They've had a couple of really bad losses this year. I'm not really bad losses, but they are throwing the ball as a top 10 group in terms of attempts, but that's not necessarily translating. They're 18th in net yards per attempt and 11th in total yards. The ground game has actually been solid. They're 27th in attempts, so they're not necessarily running the ball a ton. Obviously, that is stemmed from them playing from behind a lot in those first 4 weeks, but they're 9th in yards per attempt. So I think Zach Moss has been really good for them, and I think that their run game, because Joe Mixon could barely find room for the most part against this Ravens defense. Zach Moss and Chase Brown have found room. Now, this is the top run defense in the league. I don't expect it to be easy sledding for those guys, but I would expect them to have maybe more success than we've seen because James Cook was able to find some holes in that week 4 game, despite them not really running the ball a lot. So I am expecting the Ravens run defense to still dominate, but I wouldn't be shocked if we saw a couple of 10-yard gains from the running backs in this game, 10 plus. I'll say that. So I think this will be a higher scoring game for the opposing offense, obviously this being Cincinnati this time around, but I still think that overall this is a matchup that the Baltimore defense should win if everybody plays up to standard in this game. So coming up with the final part of the show, we have a lot more to dive into, keys to victory, predictions, players to watch, so much more as we get ahead and look ahead to today's matchup with the Cincinnati Bengals for the Ravens. Stay tuned, so much to get to on Locked On Ravens. First of the show is brought to you by FanDuel. NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You're started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet for this Ravens and Bengals game. The Ravens open up as 2.5-point favorites. If you'd like the Ravens on the favorite side or the Bengals on the underdog side, be sure to choose your side on FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com. We return, our final segment, Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher getting you ready for game day here on the show. Really appreciate everybody for being here on game day, whether you're maybe driving to a friend's house to watch the game, just getting ready for pregame in general, or anything you might be doing ahead of the 1 o'clock kickoff. Really appreciate you tuning in. Again, we're going to go live right after the game ends, so probably right around 4:30, whenever that game ends. Be sure to check us out right after the game for an instant reaction episode diving into everything that happened, win or lose, hopefully not tie, in the Ravens and Bengals game. But let's just get into some keys to victory first in this game. Talked about this on Friday's show with Sam and Joku, but I do want to kind of explain myself a little more here. Fast start. Get off to a fast start against this Bengals team. Do not let them dictate the game flow. Because, again, as I mentioned, I expect this to be a better offensive game for Baltimore's opponent this week. So Cincinnati, I think, is going to have some more success against this Ravens defense than the Bills did. But that obviously comes with, if you don't get off to a fast start yourself, you run the risk of letting Cincinnati get off to that fast start. And whoever starts faster is going to have a much better shot at winning this game. So whether it's, again, a 10-0 lead, 14-3 lead, I think it is so, so important to especially establish your dominance on the ground early, make Cincinnati fear that, and then you can just run play action off of that. You can continue to run. I mean, look, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Like, you don't have to abandon it, right? The Ravens, I think, have done a much better job this season. And, not that they did it last regular season. It was obviously more of an AFC championship thing than anything else. But we kind of saw it a little bit in week 1, too, against the Chiefs this year, where they ran Derrick Henry 5 times on the first drive, and then we didn't really see a bunch of them for the rest of the game because they got into negative game flow. If you get into negative game flow against this Cincinnati team, the Ravens can come from behind and win games. I think, it's not as big of a narrative as it once was, but I still see it pop up from time to time. Lamar can win the game with his arm. Again, that is somehow still a narrative, which I don't understand how it is. It's ridiculous if we're being honest. But while Lamar can do that, you don't want to abandon what makes you you. You don't want to abandon that part of your offense because it makes life easier on the defense. So the Ravens dictate that fast start. They have to dictate it. Do not let Cincinnati dictate the start in this one. Second key, blanket Ja'Marr Chase. Blanket Ja'Marr Chase. We saw it with Brandon Stephens. We talked about it last segment. But I do expect it to be more of a joint effort this time around between Marlon Humphrey, Brandon Stephens, Nate Wiggins. And I think, again, he'll see different coverages. They'll make sure. It's like we talked about with Devontae Adams, with CeeDee Lamb, right? With those players, you know who can beat you. Ja'Marr Chase can beat you. He's done it before to Baltimore. Don't let him beat you. Even if it's T. Higgins, make somebody else beat you that is not Ja'Marr Chase. And finally, no mercy. Foot on the gas, whatever you want to say there. You have to be able to play full 4 quarters. Was really impressed with Baltimore in week 4 against Buffalo. I thought that, again, outside of just that little beginning of the second half where it was a little bit dicey there, just a little bit dicey, I thought that Baltimore did a great job of keeping their foot on the gas. I know John Harbaugh talked about after the game how for him that was a very big emphasis, and for the team it was a big emphasis as well. So you just got to continue that. That has to be the mindset for the rest of the season. I don't care what game it is. Rest of the season, foot on gas, no mercy the entire time. Some players to watch in this one. I mean, let's just get this guy out of the way first. Right at the bottom there, Brandon Stephens. We've talked about him a ton. I'm very curious to see his usage in this game in terms of who does he cover. I think you trust him on anybody. It's just a matter of what they end up wanting to do with him, because Marlon being back and now the added luxury of having a guy like Nate Wiggins gives you some different options as opposed to just having to put Brandon Stephens on Ja'Marr Chase and kind of hope that works out for you. And obviously for Baltimore, it did. Rashad Bateman. Bateman's having a good year. I know the stats won't necessarily tell you that, but I think that he's coming up in spots where he's not catching 7 passes for 100 yards and a touchdown every game, but he is coming up in moments. It's not the star-studded, all-pro receiving stat line that's going to be there, but for Bateman in this game, going up against some of these Cincinnati corners and the Cincinnati pass defense, I'm curious to see if this can be maybe the breakout Rashad Bateman game, although I know some people will say, man, come on, Kevin, we've been waiting on that for a while. But hey, Bateman's had moments this year, and I don't want to sell him short. Obviously, you wish some more stats would be there, but the way this Ravens offense has performed, you don't necessarily need to throw the ball that much. So with that does come less opportunities. And I think Bateman, for the most part, not all the time, for the most part, has succeeded in those opportunities. Then Odafe Oweh, man, it's been fun to watch Odafe Oweh this year. Obviously, the Bengals and their offensive line, Orlando Brown Jr., actually having a decently surprising year this year in terms of him being good. I mean, obviously, I know it was a struggle for him. Always had his success against Orlando Brown in the past, but we're going to see how it all works out for Odafe Oweh. Injury report for the Ravens heading into this game. No craziness. Again, we talked about it. Their team is mostly healthy. Andrew Voorhees practiced in full. Deontay Hardy practiced in full. Rasheen Ali, who's designated to return, he was limited full, I believe that was. But the Ravens elevated both Yannick Ngakoue and Chris Collier to the active roster. So Ngakoue going to get his first game action of the year for the Ravens. Obviously not his first time in a Ravens uniform, but I'm curious to see how they use him, honestly. That's a guy, obviously, you don't want to use him on rundowns. Pure pass rusher, a la maybe a Justin Houston, if you want to go and compare him, to a guy. But Ngakoue is going to be a guy that I certainly do have my eye on in this one. So those were the two elevations this week for the Ravens. Again, if you remember, the Ravens only used one elevation last week. So I expect guys like Devontae Walker, TJ Tampa, some of those rookies or younger players to be inactive again in this game. The Ravens have been healthy this year. Healthy. And knock on wood, there it is right there. Knock on wood. The Ravens can stay that way because, man, this team has been, blessed by the injury gods so far. And again, I will continue offering up my prayers to the injury gods that it stays that way for the Ravens this season. But final predictions for this game, my score prediction, 33-24. I have the Ravens over the Bengals in week 5, sticking with what I had on Friday with Sam Njoku when he was on the show. I just think this is a game that, again, higher scoring game, but the Ravens will win this one even maybe a little bit more handily than the box score indicates. The Bengals, I think, will find some level of success against the Ravens defense, but not a ton. Might see more garbage time points where that 24 comes from. But for Baltimore, I expect them to get the win, move to 3-2, and put Cincinnati into a very uncomfortable 1-4 hole, which honestly at this point in the year is pretty dicey. But here's what I'll say. I said last week, I said it a while ago. I said it actually a really long time ago. When the Ravens dropped to 0-2, I said the Ravens have to win 2 of their next 3 games at the very minimum. And they did that. They won their last 2 games, week 3 and week 4. A loss against Cincinnati does not end their season. It'd be disappointing. We'd have plenty to talk about. And, with the way that the Ravens played in week 4, the way that the Bengals have struggled, that'd be tough to give a Bengals team more life than they already have. But 2-3 is not disaster mode for this team. 3-2 obviously will be great. And I have them going to 3-2 in this game. That's my prediction. But, it goes both ways. And I just want to play that where for the Ravens, 3-2, awesome. 2-3, tough, but not the end of the world. But if they did lose to Cincinnati, that's a little bit harder of a loss to swallow because, of course, divisional losses count more when you talk about divisional record when you're going for the AFC North crown or even just, seeding in the AFC with wild card standings and all that with conference record factoring into that as well. That's all I have for you here today, though, on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in to the show on game day. Enjoy the game. Hopefully a Ravens win. We'll be back here with you after the game. So Sunday, of course, we go live after every single game and any other game too, right? Mondays, Thursdays, we go live after every game on Locked On Ravens. So I'll see you back here after, right around 4:30, maybe 5, depending on when this game ends. So be sure to stay tuned, subscribe, follow along, video form, audio form, and I'll see you right back here soon on Locked On Ravens.